It's the Sound of Ideas Reporters Roundtable from IdeaStream Public Media. I'm Mike McIntyre, and I'd like to thank you for joining us for this special edition of the Roundtable, where we look back not on the last week's top stories, but the year's top local news stories. That's a lot to pack into one program, so we can't cover it all, but we'll hit the local highlights today and come back again next week for another hour devoted to the top news stories from the State House. And a quick note, this show was pre-taped, so if there was news after December 10th that qualified as a top 2025 story, we're not going to have it. So what's on the agenda today? Certainly not because of their play on the field. The top local story, as it was last year, was the Browns and the saga over their plan to move from the downtown Cleveland lakefront to a new multi-billion-dollar facility in Brook Park. Opposition from leaders in Cleveland and Cuyahoga County government dissolved, in Cleveland's case with a big payment from the team, and the state kicked in $600 million to facilitate the team's move, slated for the 2029 season. Now, what will Cleveland do with the opportunity to develop the lakefront? And will the land where Burke Lakefront Airport now sits be a part of that development someday? Cleveland has lost a lot of people, meaning far fewer students to fill the classrooms of Cleveland's public schools. That prompted CEO Warren Morgan to propose a consolidation plan that the school board approved December 9th. It would close a number of buildings and result in 29 fewer schools. Akron schools this year decided they had inappropriate leadership. That's what the board determined. And Superintendent Michael Robinson was shown the door as the board accepted his resignation. A longtime administrator was immediately installed as the top educator there. Meanwhile, big changes at local colleges to comply with anti-DEI rules passed by the Ohio legislature. Cleveland Heights residents voted to recall the first mayor they ever elected, Khalil Sarin. And East Cleveland Mayor Brandon King was convicted of felonies and lost his job for good. Joining me to discuss all of those stories and other top news from 2025, from News 5 Cleveland, reporter Michelle Jarboe. Hey, Michelle.
Hey, good to be here.
Good to have you with us. And from IdeaStream Public Media, reporter Abby Marshall, who concentrates on Cleveland, and Anna Huntsman, who covers Akron and Canton. Good to see both of you.
Good morning.
Glad to be here.
Good to have you. And our deputy editor for news, Andrew Meyer, joins us as well. Hey, Andrew.
Hi, Mike.
All right. Let's get ready to roundtable. We begin our look back on the top stories of 2025, pretty much where we left off at the end of 2024, with the Browns and the team's planned move to Brook Park for a new covered stadium and mixed-use development. Over the course of the last year, Cleveland Mayor Justin Bibb and Cuyahoga County Executive Chris Ronayne battled the Haslam Sports Group over everything from the Modell Law, which is meant to make it harder for Ohio teams to move from their home cities, to the height of the stadium, to a refusal to kick in public money. By December, the fight was all but over. The Browns are moving to Brook Park without county money, but with $600 million from the state. The county remains steadfast in its refusal to kick in any funding. The Browns move forward without it. So, Michelle, the fight really seemed to pivot toward the Haslams after the state funded $600 million of the project using unpaid or unclaimed funds. Was it mostly game over right at that point?
I don't know that it was quite game over, but that decision by the state was a significant blow to Cleveland, and city officials have said that they never expected the General Assembly to give the Browns a $600 million grant. That amount is unprecedented. So that certainly changed the entire conversation and put Cleveland on its heels.
And what was surprising to me is the county stayed with its vow not to give public money. You would think without the county money, we're not having a stadium. They found a way. They didn't need it.
That's right. The Haslams, the owners of the team, have said, look, we have a private solve for this. We will fill that gap. Now they are still anticipating generating about $300 million from Brook Park from new tax revenues associated with the stadium district, but that deal has not been approved yet. So we're talking about roughly a $300 million gap that they needed to fill because they were looking for the county to issue bonds tied to Brook Park and the county.
Gotcha. Abby, it seemed fait accompli at the very beginning to many people because it just seemed like the sort of, I guess for lack of a better word, the fix was in. But then this sudden twist happened in August where we see this report that says, maybe your building's a little too high and suddenly your permit's not going to be approved.
Yeah, so ODOT, the Ohio Department of Transportation, said because of this federal aviation study that was done, the building was about 50 feet too high. So they said either lower it or find a new place to build. And that's something that even when ODOT changed course on that and said, actually, it's okay, the airport remained pretty concerned about it and said, we're against that as well.
But the airport director couldn't explain The
Right.
problem with it, where it would be an issue, was just, well, it's too high. And I think ODOT then looked at that and said, it's not a legitimate or enough of a concern.
Right. The FAA did say it was in 50 feet of that airspace, but they, don't make any determination on whether or not that's an approval or not. And basically they said, this it won't actually have an impact. But the airport kind of remained in line with a lot of what the city and county officials were saying, and saying they were against it. And the reason was just operational and safety concerns, and there was not specifics on that.
There was a deal eventually reached where Cleveland dropped its lawsuit, or is in the process of doing that.
Yeah.
And that involved $100 million from the Haslams, part of that, to demolish the existing stadium. That deal was negotiated by the mayor himself, not city council. They had a problem with that.
Yeah, I think a lot of the council members felt that they were left in the dark. They didn't feel briefed on this. Some said it wasn't enough, but ultimately it did go through with only 2 no votes earlier in December, and that was basically because the mayor said this is a take it or leave it deal. We could end up with nothing at all if the courts don't rule in our favor. So a lot of them said, we don't love this, but we don't want the taxpayers to be on the hook in a few years when they have a stadium that we now have to pay to demolish.
I mentioned the county didn't kick in money, Michelle, and Chris Ronayne has been staunchly against this. He's a former downtown planner. He talked about how important the stadium would be to downtown. Where does he stand now? In fact, I think he even made comments at a council meeting in early December where he was worried about traffic and those types of things. But he doesn't seem to have come around and said, boy, this is a great idea.
Yeah, the county executive has not changed his position, and he has urged members of county council not to buy into contributing to this project in any way. And with the financial situation that the county's in, with having to look closely at its budget and facing some serious headwinds, I don't know that realistically the county is in a position where it would be smart to do much financially to participate in this.
Yeah, what council members called the worst budget they've had since this new form of government was formed in 2011. Worst meaning biggest cuts.
Yeah, they're dealing with a lot right now.
So let's talk about the lakefront then. Without a stadium, there are a whole lot of potential. There is a whole lot of potential and a whole lot of possibilities. Where does that stand now, Abby?
Yeah, so earlier this year, the mayor put out a request for proposal from developers to see how they could develop about 50 acres of downtown land, which included that Brown site. So last I talked to them, they have been interviewing, and maybe by the time this airs, there will be a developer for that site. But basically, they're looking at how can we turn this into a place that's going to get people downtown. Obviously, there's never going to be as many people coming downtown for a Browns game all at once, but how can we really make sure that we get momentum to create a place where people want to go downtown and don't just, stay in the suburbs or stay in their respective neighborhoods?
Here's the thing that Cleveland has done a lot of: just pave it all for parking.
Is that your request for proposal? That's your proposal.
A lot of it is currently just paved for parking. Right. If you've been down there, it's a big pitted parking lot and a stadium.
Right. So what we're looking at, and I've seen some of the proposals, but there would be retail housing, but also public space. The whole idea is we have this lakefront that isn't being used in the way that it could be.
Yeah, you look at Chicago. Chicago's brought up a lot in these conversations, and the big parks and green space down there. And even this summer, the city set up on the North Coast Harbor just a little recreation space, and they had thousands of people come to it. So they said this is an example. People want to be downtown. They want to have a space where they can be on the lakefront and access it. We have a 2 waterfront city that a lot of cities would kill for. So why aren't we using it? Is kind of that idea.
And we're using 400 plus acres of it for an airport right now. That became hot right after this deal. Chris Ronayne basically reached out to Mayor Bibb and said, all right, let's get moving on Burke now after this deal was essentially sealed. What does that mean? Let's get busy on Burke. It means get rid of Burke Lakefront Airport, and what could happen with that property?
Yeah, Mayor Bibb has not been shy about saying that he is in support of looking at how to reassess that lakefront space. It is a lot of lakefront space that is being used for, honestly, a lot of people aren't using that. They're going to Hopkins. It's a private airport. So there is a coalition that is against the closing of that, and obviously if you've seen the air show, there's not really another home, they say, for that. As we're looking to redevelop the entire lakefront, now's kind of the time to reassess that, I guess, holistically in their minds.
There are small airports that the smaller planes could land, Cuyahoga County Airport. There are other options. They just aren't directly downtown where you can hop to your meeting or your sport event and get back in and fly back to where you
Yeah.
came from.
Yeah.
What's going on with federal help to do that? I know that the mayor had reached out to the congressional delegation, to senators. Michelle, are they amenable to helping the city get rid of Burke?
It seems as though they're very open to a conversation. Senator Bernie Moreno told one of my colleagues that he specifically asked Mayor Bibb and County Executive Ronayne to write a letter formally requesting the closure of Burke. And Moreno seems supportive with two caveats. One is that he wants to see a real plan for what would go on that property. He doesn't want us to close an airport and just have that property sitting there with nothing going on for a long time. And then he wants to be assured that there is broad community support for doing this. And, you know, as Abby mentioned, there are some opponents to this, including tenants and users of the airport, and they have been trying to lobby Congress as well.
Abby, you know Mayor Bibb pretty well. Is there any chance that he would jump into a bulldozer?
I was going
like
to
they
say,
did in Chicago?
if we're bringing up Chicago, that's always an option, just overnight.
I think the penalties for doing that are a lot higher now than they were back then.
Literally, they just put X's right through the runway.
I know, it's so awesome. Yeah, I don't see him doing that, but I do see him wanting to get momentum to kind of see his lakefront vision go through.
And last thing on this, and Abby had brought it up, Michelle, which is that we're a two waterfront town. There's a riverfront as well. There's a tax increment financing improvement district there. Development's happening with Dan Gilbert, the owner of the Cleveland Cavaliers.
That's right, yeah. Dan Gilbert's real estate company controls a large arc of riverfront behind Tower City, and they are really moving along. The first building in that project, a new practice facility for the Cavs, and a Cleveland Clinic sports medicine complex, that is well under construction and is scheduled to open in 2027. I think one thing that's important to note is that the private sector is really able to drive the bus with public help on what's happening on the riverfront. The lakefront is a little bit of a different animal because it is city-owned land and requires a lot of infrastructure, and right now the public sector is really behind the wheel.
And I do want to note that by building a new practice facility, another is opening, and perhaps that could be the home of the new WNBA franchise.
That's right.
Practice home.
The plan is that the WNBA team would practice in independence at the current Cavs practice facility once the Cavs move to the new practice facility downtown, and then you could accommodate both teams playing at Rocket Arena.
Awesome. All right, let's move on to Akron. The public schools there went through a rapid change of leadership in the spring after months of controversy and complaints about the actions and management style of Superintendent Michael Robinson. In April, the board accepted his resignation after less than 2 years on the job. Then it immediately hired his successor without conducting a search. Anna, let's start with Robinson. His fate was essentially sealed when a report found credible complaints that he was bullying staff. What were the allegations there? It seemed like a horrible place to work.
Yeah, that's one way to put it. There were 16 people interviewed, former and current staff, whom I'll just go through some of the things that they said. He yelled at people. Sometimes there was one allegation that I guess it's not an allegation, it was found credible. He yelled at someone in the hallway so loud that people 2 floors down could hear. He made some sort of threats about a school board member, saying that her children will reap what she sows if she's not careful, things like that. But it was mostly a target around this toxic bullying work environment. Michael Robinson said that he has high standards and that perhaps the school district and its staff weren't held to these high standards before and weren't used to that management style.
And he shrouded a lot of that in a religious mission, a biblical mission as well.
Yeah, he said he was anointed for the position and often made religious comments like that. So this had been going on for quite some time. We heard rumors, we heard allegations. Finally, one of the school board members wrote a letter detailing, what she was experiencing, and then this investigation kind of happened. And as I mentioned, much of it was found to be credible.
So he is ushered out the door with an acceptance of his resignation, and then immediately the successor is hired, somebody who's been on the staff for many, many years. That struck some as unusual because wouldn't you do a national search and get the best possible candidate?
Right, and before Michael Robinson was Christine Fowler Mack, who was not on the superintendent for very long either. So that didn't work out, and then Michael Robinson didn't work out, and so then suddenly at the very end of this meeting, they pick Mary Outley, who's been a longtime staff member in Akron Public Schools, I think over 30 years. She's from Akron. She's well known in the district, and it was a split vote. They voted 4-3, and that is because some of the board members said, hey, isn't this kind of unethical? We're not following our own policy about wanting to conduct a search of, casting the widest net possible, and instead kind of just picking, she was the interim superintendent at the time. Whereas some people on the other side say, well, she's the best candidate for the job, and she's already doing the job, and let's kind of move forward with her.
And we know we don't have those kinds of allegations about her yelling at
Exactly.
people and those types of things. She's worked with them and
Right.
obviously plays well with others.
Right, and she had actually interviewed for the job previously, and who knows why she ultimately wasn't picked. But yeah, as you mentioned, she doesn't have those allegations. She's been with the district for a really long time, and in 2026 we'll be hearing more from her about how that's going. And it seems to have quieted now as far as the complaints about how she was picked.
Andrew, as we mentioned, 3 superintendents since 2023, and now the division on the school board shows itself. By year's end, voters ousted 2 members of the board. Is that coincidental?
No, not at all. Not at all in this case. The 2 of the incumbents who lost, one of them was Diana Autry. She's the one who pulled that 11:30 maneuver at that board meeting where they decided to separate with Robinson and said, hey, let's make Mary Outley the superintendent without a search, without any further ado. There was blowback from that. Also, the board president at the time, Carla Jackson, also lost her bid for re-election. So there were some big changes at the school board of Education as a result of, I think, the upset over the superintendent procedure.
All right, staying on schools, let's move to Cleveland. The Cleveland Metropolitan School District Board of Education voted unanimously on December 9th to approve a plan that administrators say right-sizes the district to reflect population decline. The goal, the district says, is to make sure all students are learning in quality school buildings with offerings spread around the district instead of focusing on some schools dedicated to high-level pursuits such as science, engineering, technology, and math. To do that, the district decided to close dozens of buildings and consolidate other schools. And Abby, it's an issue that's deeply personal to parents. We've been covering, Connor Morris has been out there covering parents saying, listen, this is our school, and now you're going to screw that up. But the district says, listen, the population makes this necessary.
Of course, yeah, there's not enough enrollment to keep these buildings in the kind of condition that the district would like to see, but this is very personal to parents and also council members as well. Council member Mike Polensek has been very outspoken about this, particularly when it comes to Collinwood and Glenville High School, which are rivals and are going to become one. And that's a move that he said, if we continue to take away things from students in this district, particularly on the east side, parents are going to move to the suburbs. It's going to add to more population loss. They might send their kids to charter schools. We got to give them a reason to stay. And he said neighborhood schools is a big part of that. Meanwhile, you have the superintendent saying we have to deal with this budget cut problem that we're facing.
And how quickly is he saying that'll happen?
It's going to happen by next fall. So
Wow.
yeah, it's going to happen quickly. They have to contend with this budget shortfall, and so they're starting plans to do so with this approval at the earlier meeting this month.
So we mentioned Collinwood and Glenville High Schools combining. What are some of the other highlights, Andrew, that the consolidation plan would bring?
Well, a number of the magnet schools that have multiple campuses, they're going to be consolidated. Some of the older buildings, the district will be moving out of those and moving students to newer, more recently built schools. Some of them in the case are just a few miles away, but a lot of parents are raising concerns. Even just a few miles is a big change for their kids.
And we're going to be left then with a number of empty school buildings. Michelle, you've looked into what alternate uses could be for these, and it's not easy. It's, you can't make them Halloween stores, I guess, You've got to do something with these buildings that's worthwhile, and it's a difficult thing to do. Developers say it's tricky.
It is tricky, and I think the city and CMSD would not go for Halloween stores,
I
just
wouldn't
to be
either.
clear. But yeah, there are 2 particular reasons that these are such tricky projects. One, think about older school buildings in particular. They have wide hallways, they have gyms, they have auditoriums. All of these are spaces that developers can't rent out. they don't make money. These buildings are a lot less efficient than if you were building something with new construction or converting a building that had like narrower corridors. The second is that a few years ago, the General Assembly changed the rules of the game, and they blocked developers from being able to use historic preservation tax credits and low-income housing tax credits on the same projects. And that might sound wonky, but what it did was it killed a bunch of redevelopment deals for existing empty CMSD schools. And it's going to be a big challenge for some of these buildings that are opening up that are historic and that are in neighborhoods that could use affordable housing but can't necessarily support like luxury apartments.
You can do something with them. You look at the West Tech lofts. In Lakewood, there was a Catholic school, St. James, which was converted in this beautiful shared workspace and office facility. It can be done. It takes a lot of money. It takes a market for it.
Yeah, there's one in Collinwood that was converted into senior housing. There's one in the Jefferson neighborhood that was recently converted into what people might describe as workforce housing, modestly priced apartments. But those were labors of love for the developers and the communities involved. They required a lot of sources of financing, and they took a long time. So I think the community needs to be prepared realistically that these things aren't going to happen in like a year or two.
Okay. And our final education issue before we take our break. This is a statewide story. I know we're going to dig deeper into those with our State House News Bureau folks next week. But we thought it important to include the passage of Senate Bill 1, which went into effect in June, in our local roundup because of the profound impact it's having on our local institutions of higher learning. The bill's aim was to remove what its supporters call liberal bias and wokeness on college campuses. It banned diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And Anna, centers devoted to a lot of those initiatives, LGBTQ+, and women and multicultural populations, several campuses just eliminated those programs.
Yeah, I think Ohio State and Ohio University were the first ones, and then you saw the local ones here. Kent State had a longstanding women's center, the LGBTQ center, and a living learning community where folks could kind of all live together in the same dorm, as well as a multicultural center. And several centers at Cleveland State also closed, and the people there have been, that were working there have been shifted to other programs. For example, the longtime director of the Women's Center, Cassandra Pegg Kirby, she now works for the Center for Adults and Veteran Services. So this is like focus on students who are parents and things like that. So they've seemed to have found other jobs on campus, but what people continue to say is that the students were able to go to these places for resources and support, and now it's not in one centralized place anymore.
They have dropped a number of low enrollment programs too, Andrew, and the question then is, will there be staffing cuts as a result of that?
Well, many of the universities across Northeast Ohio have said, no, we're not planning on any cuts to staff at this point, but they are forced by state law to take a look at those low enrolled programs, and if they can't get a waiver for them, they have to make them go away.
And Jerry Serino, who is the architect of this bill, in addition to the anti-wokeness, which is one of the driving factors, said he wants colleges to be more efficient. He says this will get them there?
He says it will get them there faster, but I got to say that universities have been dealing with the enrollment cliff for a number of years now. Many of them have been formulating plans about how they deal with shrinking enrollment and shrinking dollars as a result. So maybe Senator Serino is putting the need to the back, saying you got to do it quicker, you got to do it quicker. But the schools are already thinking about this. They have been thinking about this.
Right. All right, we're going to take a quick break right now. And when we return, we'll talk about some of the other notable stories of the year, including a change in leadership in East Cleveland and Cleveland Heights. This is the Sound of Ideas Reporters Roundtable, the year-end edition for local news. I'm Mike McIntyre, and we'll be right back. You're back with the Sound of Ideas Reporters Roundtable from IdeaStream Public Media. I'm Mike McIntyre. Thanks for staying with us. This week, we're looking back on the notable stories of 2025 with Anna Huntsman, Abby Marshall, and Andrew Meyer of IdeaStream, and Michelle Jarboe of News 5. A note before we get back to the roundtable to check out our IdeaStream News Quiz. We have a special year-end version of the quiz that tests your knowledge of the year's news. You'll find the quiz at ideastream.org/quiz. East Cleveland had 3 people serving as mayor in 2025. Brandon King, mayor when the year began, was convicted on public corruption charges in May and removed from that job. Before that, while facing trial, Sandra Morgan was appointed interim mayor. And once the sitting mayor, Brandon King, was convicted, the charter called for Council President Lateef Shabazz to become the mayor. He was defeated in November by Morgan, who will return to the mayor's office. That's a lot of mayors, Michelle. A lot of mayors in one short amount of time.
A lot to keep track of.
So a judge appointed Sandra Morgan as the interim mayor for some months. She's going to be returning now to that job. The citizens said so resoundingly.
That's right. Yeah, she won in a real landslide.
Yeah, I think something like 80% of the vote. She'll be back after being elected to a full term, now a full term. She says she welcomes placing the city's finances under state control, receivership. That's something that Lateef Shabazz was against. Why does she say it's a good idea?
It seems that she feels there's a need to get to the bottom of what's gone on there. She talked about uncovering the truth and trying to rebuild, create a more responsible city government. And she sees the state intervention and the resources that the state can bring to be a route to doing that.
I know that one of the council members there, Pat Blahoviak, who emails in, and in fact, if we were live today, we would be getting an email right now about this, says it's not a great idea, they don't need the receivership, that it's essentially the state has been a part of the problem. We'll see how that plays out when the new mayor takes over.
Yeah, there are certainly a variety of people who are anxious about that idea. They don't know what it will mean. I think there are a lot of fears in East Cleveland, which is so economically depressed, about gentrification and displacement of residents, and the possibility that came up years ago about whether East Cleveland might be annexed or absorbed in some way into Cleveland. But it's clear something there needs to change.
All right. And the mayor's office in Cleveland Heights was a revolving door this year, too. Voters recalled the city's first elected mayor, Khalil Saran, in September. The recall vote resulted from a tumultuous period in Cleveland Heights City Hall that saw Saran and his wife accused of creating a hostile work environment. Saran denied those accusations. Andrew, though, voters said, listen, you're out. First of all, we're recalling you. And then they voted subsequently for a new mayor.
That's right. So in the interim, though, the city council president is the interim mayor until January 1st, when Jim Petrus, who was elected in the November election, will take the office.
A lot of this came from the mayor's wife, her behavior. People said that she was abusive in the hallway, yelling at people. But then the one big thing, and she eventually pleaded guilty to this, was a trespassing charge, a criminal trespassing, where she went into the house of a resident who had a recall sign in their yard.
And in the sentencing, or in the plea rather, it was she entered what's called an offered plea or an Alford's plea, which is where you're convinced you're not guilty, but you are not so sure you're going to actually win.
So I think the judge, though, said you've got to take responsibility for this, and in fact, it offered or ordered psychological counseling.
And 2 years probation on that, yeah. She needs to do that within 30 days of the court appearance.
Okay. Police issues remain top of mind for Cleveland and Akron throughout 2025. Both cities' police departments are working to make their operations more transparent and to regain public trust. Cleveland's policy changes are the result of a federal consent decree that was implemented a decade ago. City wants to get out of it. The federal monitor says, no, you still need to have some more time. Andrew, Cleveland's been under that consent decree since 2015. A report from the federal monitor just this month was critical of arrest patterns. What were they critical of?
If you are black and you're driving, you're 3 times more likely to be pulled over than if you're white. I mean, it's still pretty damning about what has not been accomplished. Now, the monitor did cite improvements in policy and procedure earlier in the year for the department, and certainly the city wants to get out from under the consent decree. One of the main drivers there is how much it costs. Tens of millions of dollars each year to go through this process. But there's still, from what we're seeing from this most recent report from the monitor, there's still issues, serious issues, that need to be dealt with.
It started because they found a pattern and practice of unconstitutional policing. It's not constitutional if you're targeting certain groups of people. So that's another one of those issues. And there's still a number on the list that need to be picked off for them to do that. On the other hand, nationally, we're hearing from the administration, don't really care that much about consent decrees.
So one way or another, Cleveland's time under the consent decree may be coming to an end sooner than expected. Who knows?
And let's talk about Cuyahoga County. The Sheriff's Downtown Safety Patrol, now known as the Community Support Unit, faced scrutiny over 2 fatal chases that killed bystanders. There was a push, though, then to expand the unit. So there's been a lot of discussion, Abby, about this Downtown Safety Patrol.
Yeah, but a lot of that is contingent on the budget and the funding. As we talked about this year, it's particularly tight. So they recognize that there is a need for that, but, money constraints.
But the idea, though, that there were these chases and that people lost their lives as a result of it brought up a lot of criticism. There's this balance of, do we need this happening in our city? On the other hand, the city of Cleveland is thankful for the help.
Yeah, and they say that, there has been council members that have pushed for the city to help pay for it if the city receives most of the services, but that's something that's controversial and unclear if that's going to happen.
All right, let's talk about the jail. That's another criminal justice issue. County is in progress to build a new jail. There's been a lot of renderings released. Michelle, where are we at? Have they put a shovel in the ground?
Not quite, but the construction fencing is up on the site in Garfield Heights, and the county hopes to start demolishing the existing buildings there in February.
Now, we know they're in financial crunch, but that doesn't necessarily affect the capital budget for something like this.
Well, this would be a situation where there would be bonds issued in order to pay for the project.
Like $890 million?
Yeah, I
Something
think
like
we're
that?
we're talking about a budget that, yes, is approaching $1 billion.
This is almost a stadium. I mean, it's getting close. Anyway, all right. In Akron, and Ann, I'm going to ask you about this, the fatal shooting of Jasmine Tucker in 2024 continued to reverberate in the community, especially after a grand jury did not indict the officer involved. And just this week at a council meeting, Jerome McClendon, who goes by 52 Keys on social media, sang a pointed Christmas song to city council. Here it is.
We know that Akron's in dismay. It's filled with lots of drugs and killings every day. And the folks we pay to fight the crime are the first to shoot us every time. And so I'm offering the simple phrase to kids from 1 to 93. Should not have to say anyhow, anyway, please don't shoot us. Please don't shoot us. Please don't shoot us. APD. Boom, 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 boom.
Wow. I mean, I started to watch that and I said, oh, this is kind of flippant. And as I listened to this guy, the commentary that he made, this is what Akron and a lot of police departments are facing, this lack of trust. It doesn't have to be a consent decree. This seems to even carry more power than that.
This same sentiment is said every single week in council meetings in Akron. It's just not always saying. This has been an issue for many, many years in Akron about this distrust, especially among the Black community with the police. And it was elevated again this year when the grand jury did not indict the officer who shot Jasmine Tucker. But on top of all that, you also have the police auditor, Anthony Fennell, is continuing to do these kind of internal investigations looking into use of force incidents. And time again, he's bringing up a concern that police are using force too much and too often. And so things like this is what he kind of brings up all the time, is using tasers when people are on bicycles, property damage that police are doing while having these pursuits, and head strikes is something that he continues to bring up. So that, on top of the community's demands, has led to a use of force policy review. And so the city is undergoing that right now, trying to get their standards up to the national standards when it comes to use of force. So that's definitely something to come in 2026.
In the meanwhile, there's still an investigation on the Tucker shooting.
So it's the Bureau of Criminal Investigation has wrapped up their investigation there, but the police department is doing its internal investigation. That's basically to see were policies correctly followed. And then Anthony Fennell will do his investigation and come out with his report as well. So again, much to look forward to in 2026.
Okay. We'll turn our attention now to a story that IdeaStream was involved in. Cleveland State University's Board of Trustees and IdeaStream Public Media's board voted this year to enter a public service operating agreement, enter into one of those, in which IdeaStream's Jazz Neo station took over the terrestrial radio signal of the student-run college station WCSB. CSU retains the FCC license for that. The leaders of CSU and IdeaStream described the agreement as a win-win. For IdeaStream, a station for jazz, one of its core missions. For CSU, professional partnerships to benefit the students with internships and projects. But they weren't the only parties involved. Students who ran the station and hosted shows didn't consider it a win at all, nor did the many ardent supporters, many who once worked at WCSB. Andrew, we're still seeing protests in the form of social media comments.
Yeah, pretty regularly still on posts that go up on Facebook. You will see typically, mostly civil, something along the lines of bring back WCSB. But what we should note is that IdeaStream News is separate and not involved with the decision that was made to take over WCSB under the Public Service Operating Agreement. And we continue to cover this story from all perspectives, including the voices of the students and the other staff at WCSB who were affected by the PSOA.
One of the things we continue to hear on those social media posts and in other, whenever there's a public event, is give it back. Give the signal back to the students, let them have their station back. We've heard no indication from the leadership at Cleveland State or IdeaStream that that's likely to happen.
That's correct. There's been no indication that there's going to be any change on that.
Even those who appreciate jazz and appreciate having a jazz station. And by the way, it is not smooth jazz. I've heard that it's this elevator music smooth jazz. It isn't. It's really, it's a good mix of music. Dan Paletta does a terrific job, and all the other folks there, but he's helping to program that. But even those who love jazz, what I've heard from them is this wasn't handled very well. The idea that students were told, by the university, by the way, your signal's already a jazz station. Police are going to be here to make sure that you get out of this facility. That was all, it's Cleveland State's facility. It's Cleveland State's decision to do those things. But what we've heard is that's one of the things that really angers the community.
Well, IdeaStream management, senior management, has said the intent has always been to strengthen local public media and expand access to meaningful programming for the entire community. One of the things that IdeaStream senior management has said has always been part of this was expanding educational opportunities for Cleveland State students. And that
Right.
means more internships, additional volunteer opportunities, other opportunities that expand access into broadcasting at IdeaStream.
And I know that the station or the university leadership and students continue to talk, hopefully, about some sort of path for streaming or other types of things and help with that. The last thing is that the president of Cleveland State University is now an ex officio member of the IdeaStream board. That also has been a point of contention. I want to note, some people think that that's like you get big compensation. That's not the case. It's not a compensated job. But she is a member of the IdeaStream board now, and that doesn't sit very well with these protesters either.
But that is no different than what happened when IdeaStream Public Media and WKSU merged, which was a public service operating agreement with Kent State University. As part of that process, the president of Kent State University became a board member.
Oh, I thought you did, because you came from... No.
No.
You just became our deputy editor for news. All right, moving along. Lawsuits filed against the Catholic Diocese of Youngstown and Ursuline High School this year alleged a culture of hazing within the football program going back to 2022. The hazing allegedly took place during a football camp trip, and there were other incidents, too, that weren't involved in that trip. The lawsuits and allegations leveled against players and coaches eventually resulted in the entire football season for Ursuline being canceled. And Andrew, both the diocese and the school administrators have pushed back forcefully on the allegations. They say they didn't cover up the hazing, but we see a new lawsuit, it seems, every other week from the Chandra law firm saying, here's another person alleging bad behavior.
And the allegations go back several years, maybe to 2022 at this point, but the diocese and the school says that as soon as they learned about this in 2025, they took action that was in line with the student handbook and the code of conduct. So that's their position.
All right, we'll continue to cover that story as those lawsuits wend their way through court. And Guardians pitchers Emmanuel Clase, the superstar closer, and Luis Ortiz, a starter with promise, were suspended with pay in July as part of a Major League Baseball investigation into betting. By November, the pair had been indicted on charges they rigged pitches to help bettors win prop bets or situational bets, whether the ball will be a ball or a strike that's thrown. If the pitcher has control of that, he can throw it in the dirt, and it's definitely not going to be a strike. The two now face a trial in May. And Anna, both of them, Clase and Ortiz, they've maintained their innocence, but we saw in the indictment report a lot of pretty serious allegations and what looked like some pretty decent evidence.
Yeah, they had screenshots in there of where the ball was moving, the specific pitch that had been betted on. And as you mentioned, they maintain their innocence. Lawyers have said that once this all plays out, that they will be found to be completely innocent, and that Clase was using this money for legal purposes in the Dominican Republic. So
Yeah, the text messages to who's purported to be part of the betting ring while in the dugout or while in the bullpen
Yes.
seem pretty difficult
and that's
to
against
surmount.
MLB policy just in general. So
Right.
that's something to look at there. But this was such an interesting time when this was all kind of unfolding, and it was first Ortiz was placed on leave, and you started to see videos come out on social media of the pitches that they were looking at. It was in June, and when you look at it, if you're a fan of baseball and you watch and you go, oh yeah, that's that's an interesting
Yeah,
looking pitch there.
they look like a politician throwing out a first pitch.
Right.
Right? I mean,
Right.
like
These
not
are
even
professional
close.
players. I mean, as you mentioned, Clase, a superstar. And then once he was suspended, then it was like, oh, wow, this is perhaps a bigger problem in the dugout. So more to come on that.
And this is creating some changes in the betting world, which has been expanded exponentially in the last few years, Andrew. These prop bets, you can bet basically on anything, but they're going to be reined in a little bit.
They're going to be reined in by Major League Baseball. I know Governor DeWine has also said, hey, we got to pull back on this. But I think a lot of people are having their eyes open to just what legalized professional sports betting is meaning, because they probably thought, oh, yeah, I'll bet on whether a team wins or loses. And the fact that you can put a bet on such a microscopic thing like a pitch,
Right.
really?
Yeah. $200 would be the limit now on that, which I
Yes.
still think is like, okay. But I guess people were betting big money on those things. That's one of the reasons they got caught, is they could see the betting pattern and all that money that was going on a certain pitch that went a certain way. All right, we're going to take our last break of the show right now. We come back, we'll talk about some more top stories for 2025, including the renovation of an iconic Cleveland space. This is the Sound of Ideas Reporters Roundtable, and I'm Mike McIntyre. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Sound of Ideas Reporters Roundtable. I'm Mike McIntyre. Glad to have you with us today as we talk about the news of the year. I'm joined this week by Michelle Jarboe of News 5, Andrew Meyer and Anna Huntsman, and Abby Marshall, all from IdeaStream. This week, we're taking a look back at some of the biggest stories of 2025, and the long-discussed renovations to Cleveland's iconic West Side Market went from the drawing board to groundbreaking in May. The multi-year plan calls for a $70 million makeover of the 113-year-old structure. And Michelle, much of the first phase of this work is behind the scenes. It's not the exciting stuff, but it's critical.
That's right. And the initial construction started with the produce arcade, so that is something that people are seeing as they go to shop, that part of it has been closed off, and vendors have been shifted around. But the guts of the building are a major part of this and a huge expenditure. We're talking about the basement, which I have been in, but very few
it's
shoppers have seen.
not pretty.
It is archaic. And so that is the space where vendors cut meat and prepare fish and store their product. And the idea is to overhaul that completely, along with the basic building systems. We're talking about heating and cooling, things that were not really contemplated, certainly not in a modern way when that building was built over a century ago.
But we're then going to see the stuff that you can see. There's other kinds of things that are planned. There's shared space and places to eat and those types of things.
That's right. More sort of centralized prepared food in part of the produce arcade, and seating, better connection to the main market building from that arcade. And then there's empty locker room space on the second floor of the market that will become a demonstration kitchen and event space. But they are still fundraising for some of this work, and the kind of nuts and bolts have to come before all the sexy stuff.
And you said fundraising, which makes me think how this would never have happened if the city were still not only owning but managing it. And we've noted here that there's now nonprofit management which can do fundraising, which is why you're seeing a lot of this progress there. Let's talk about some changes at a couple other places very briefly. Abby, in May, Cleveland Hopkins International Airport announced a massive renovation there. What's going on with that?
Yeah, so over the next decade, it'll be about $1 billion facelift. So that will be more parking capacity, a new terminal, and a new garage that's currently built on the Orange Lot, and that will add about capacity for about 4,000 to 6,000 vehicles. So we will be seeing those changes coming soon to the airport.
And we had a ribbon cutting this month on a new bathroom.
Indeed, you're very excited
actually
about
cut
that.
a ribbon
Every
on it.
time you get,
I couldn't
so-
believe it. Anyway.
Seems small, but people really care.
They do care, and as I mentioned on the show before, I think that was the only clean bathroom in Hopkins. Anyway, the Akron-Canton Airport is also planning for a busier future. What do those plans entail, Anna?
Yeah, they unveiled their next strategic plan, and the big part of this is a new tower. Their current control tower was built in 1962, so I don't know about you. I think it's about time that should be upgraded. They said that that's going to cost about $55 million, they think. So that's one of the big things. Other things are they're continuing to expand their nonstop service. They're expanding a lot with the airline Breeze Airways to add more nonstop destinations. They're at 24, or I should say, 24 now. And the They just actually unveiled a new sensory room. So for kids that are dealing with a lot of stimuli or people who have autism, they actually just unveiled that in early December.
Yes, just for us, but when you're watching this, it was several weeks ago. All right, residents around the Shaker Lakes who already saw Horseshoe Lake drained have rallied against a proposal by the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District to drain the remaining lower lake and turning that too into parkland. The sewer district responsible for spending on flood control had planned to replace the lower lake dam, but said new data showed that draining the lake would be the best and most economical flood control measure. Sound of Ideas brought together stakeholders for a community tour discussion in August, and Andrew, the lead up to the community tour, the Regional Sewer District, said it may be able to salvage part of the lake. Maybe there'll be a pond or something of that nature.
It was new information, and it's kind of nice, actually, because everybody's been looking at it as an all-or-nothing deal. Either you got the lake and you put in a lot of money into fixing those dams, bring them up to the standards, modern standards, or you get rid of the lake. But they're figuring now if they can reroute the Doan Brook, I believe it is, that they can save a portion of the lake.
And there are still, though, many residents who are opposed to it. This is not over. There's
not over,
legal
no.
legal challenges that have been filed very recently. A lot is still going on about whether, and if you go there, it is beautiful. It's a wonderful, idyllic place to be. The question is it also a potential danger downstream?
Because when those dams fail, and they're thinking about catastrophic, more than 100-year rainstorms, but really, 24 inches in 24 hours, those dams aren't going to hold up to that.
All right, efforts to preserve the historic Firestone Tire and Rubber Company plant number 1 in Akron fell short this year. Demolition crews were scheduled to begin taking down the structure this month. Anna, there was a big effort to preserve it, and you know why. I mean, it's really a part of the city's DNA.
Yeah.
The clock tower particularly is
Which
something
is on
people...
the front part of the building.
Yeah, and so what was the plan? They thought they were going to be able to save it,
They
but then
want
couldn't?
to preserve the front part of the clock tower. So the demolition that's getting started now is the entire back of the building. And so they are scheduled to start demolishing the front in March. So there is still hope that that could potentially be preserved. And there were all kinds of ideas that were thrown out about this. Apartments, a community space, a museum.
A Halloween store.
Right.
No, sorry.
Right. Well, yeah.
None of those.
No Spirit Halloween for this one. But they said that there's environmental covenants that they can't get around, and that the building has been vacant for a long time, and so there's been vandalism and things like that. But also, it has been on the market for a very long time. So that's the city of Akron's point of view. They keep saying if a developer wanted it, they have tried. It can't happen at this point. We'd like to use that space.
Could you save at least the clock tower? Is that still a
So
possibility?
they couldn't find a developer who could do that at this point. But like I said, not till March. So I think there are some people who are still holding out hope that there could be a last ditch effort.
Okay. And as we finish up our retrospective of the top stories of 2025, let's just take the last few minutes here to look ahead. What are stories that each of you will be following in 2026 that we haven't discussed here, or maybe expanding on something we've already discussed? Let's just go down the line, starting with Anna.
Yeah, I think continuing to follow the police reform efforts in Akron, but also just throughout Northeast Ohio. Been doing a lot of historical coverage, a new series called Hidden History, so I can't wait to keep digging into that.
Love that. You can catch that on Instagram. IdeaStream NEO is our handle there. But really good stuff. You're doing that, and Kabir Bhatia, who's also doing What It Was,
Yes.
which is, he did one about this very building. Really cool stuff. I think people do love history. Abby, what are you going to work on?
Well, the Browns are done, right?
No, but well, I mean, they're done for the season.
Yeah, so just continuing any updates with that, even though it's mostly over here in Cleveland. But I'll be really interested in looking at that lakefront development thing, seeing how that shakes out, including Burke Airport.
Okay, and Andrew?
I'd have to go with midterm elections. Now, we were really surprised when the maps that the Ohio Redistricting Commission came up mid-census were not what we expected. They actually were a bit of a surprise. So, there's a 20th century politician who said all politics are local, and I think these midterms are going to be extremely local.
Yeah, really going to be looking forward to that. And Michelle, what about you at News 5?
Well, I think Abby and I are going to be doing a lot of the same stories. And I think, though we've done many, many stories this year about the Browns, I think now we're moving to the next chapter in Brook Park and like what this thing is really going to look like and the additional public money. So stay tuned for more on that.
Absolutely. And as the executive editor, I'm looking at all of that, right? Whatever you guys do. Yeah, that's what we're doing. But yeah, it's going to be, I think the election is big this year, and we are going to rally to get all of our folks to cover that. Also, IdeaStream is planning on putting an intensive effort on a number of subjects this year. One of them will be AI and how it's affected Northeast Ohio. So you'll be seeing that sometime in February. We're then going to marshal the forces and talk about another topic. Perhaps it's about youth mental health. So some of those things we're really going to get together and do an intensive effort for a week at a time on some of those stories. And that wraps up our look back on the year's top local stories. Next week, we'll check in with our State House team for the year's top statewide news. And my thanks to you, Andrew Meyer, to Abby Marshall, to Anna Huntsman, and Michelle Jarbo, not just for this show, but for the great work all of you do in journalism. Local journalism particularly is important.